Hi everybody, we're just going to wait a little bit, wait until 3:30 to start. Thank you for joining us today. Hi everyone, my name is Cassandra Dinkelman and I work at Down Syndrome Queensland. I'm the Education Support Officer. My phone number for work is 3356 6655 and my email address is there at the bottom of the screen, edsupport@downsyndromeqld.org.au. I'm just going to let you all know that during the presentation, I will be aiming, because there are so many people logged in, I'll be aiming not to answer any questions as we go along. What I will do instead is there's a questions section at the end, so you could either type your questions in as we go and I will answer them at the end, or you could wait until the end and I'll answer them there. I hope that's understandable for everyone. And apologies if I'm too loud. I've tried to turn it down as much as I can, but I know I have a loud voice. Okay, so let's get started. Today I am presenting our webinar called Supporting Learning at Home, which is specifically aimed for students with Down syndrome. So I won't necessarily be mentioning and for students with Down syndrome because that is who I had in mind when I was considering the things that I'll be talking about today. So firstly, congratulations. So far you have managed to navigate this far in the learning at home experience. For everyone who's involved, it's something new. So for teachers, teaching assistants, support workers, parents and children, we're all learning as we go. And I know that you understand this has been quite a stressful situation for all of us involved. I wanted to firstly mention the fact that there's been much talk about homeschooling, but I want to point out that this is not homeschooling. Homeschooling looks completely different to what we're doing currently, and it would be more accurate to call this, what we're doing, emergency remote learning, because it's something we haven't done before. It's something we're having to do because of circumstances at the moment. But that would indicate that we need flexibility and to make sure that even though we are flexible, that we are providing direction for everyone involved. The good news is that what you are delivering in the classrooms is exactly what you need to be delivering for those people online. Okay, so ultimately, everybody involved in this wants children to progress, but we do know that there will be some gaps. There will be issues that happen along the way. We're just aiming for everyone to do the best they possibly can. So parents may already be feeling concerns about things such as their children's behaviour or anxiety from a number of people, communication with the school, with the other family members, with everyone, learning, how that's going to look, and health as well. So we need to make sure that we're reassuring families that we're doing the best that we possibly can. While we're helping families, it will be a good idea to make sure that we are often setting those expectations. So making our expectations and our instructions as clear as we possibly can. There will be times from families where they're feeling or worried about guilt, where they're feeling concern for inability, whoever that is coming from, and that there will be struggle. But we can work through all of these things as long as we communicate with each other and we're flexible. So in this time, we're planning for the best case scenario. We're offering a model of the ideal, what we would like to happen, but we need to remember to encourage parents or families to do what works for them. So let the parents understand that they have been teaching their children from the first moment they had them. So they do know what they need to do. They know their children. But we are the educators. Therefore, we provide the guidance on the education side. They will know what will and won't work. And if they find that something hasn't worked along the way, then we'll be able to communicate and work through that. So while you're providing information and curriculum at home for students, you can be doing that by providing something like a matrix. So a matrix of activities which will allow all the students to succeed, not just those with Down syndrome. So for example, in assessments or weekly tasks, you could be providing a grid of activities. Some of those would be must-do activities. Some of those would be can-do activities, and there could even be a space for if you like, so furthering that if you would like to take the time to do this. But this is all an opportunity to explore those new things or those things you've been thinking about for the classroom that you haven't perhaps put in place yet, as well as making sure that we are providing those opportunities for students so that they feel that everything is familiar to them, if that makes sense. What we will cover. So I've divided this into a few little categories: willing and able, communication and connection, collaboration, how that might look, useful resources, and a summary. And then after that, we'll have question time so that we can discuss any concerns that anybody might have. Hopefully I'll be able to answer those straight away, but if I can't, I will certainly come back to you with answers. Let's look at willing and able then. Okay, so we've already been working through this for a little while. And in that time, you will have seen that unless families and students are both willing and able, the learning at home hasn't been successful. And there can be a number of factors determining what makes somebody or, a family or an activity successful. And those factors would definitely include technology, so navigating the variety of platforms and codes, the times that they need to get on for certain activities, maybe sharing technologies, access, having the time to be able to complete all of the activities, understanding of the activities that need to be completed, parents' own work schedules and the work schedules of other people in the family or in the household. But that's just as a start. So we must consider that every family is finding this time difficult. I will stop saying that now because hopefully you all understand that this has been a difficult time. But we need to understand that for this learning at home to be successful, we have to be all willing and able. You can't be one without the other. So hopefully during the time that families have been home, they've already done things like created a home learning space where there's no distractions, the lighting is good, they have room to be able to put their work down, they have the resources such as pencils and those sorts of things, and they've got a space where they can be writing as well. They've responded to communication with you and they understand what your expectations are. They've established a routine. They've displayed useful resources, so things like 100 squares and alphabet displayed on the walls, and manipulatives are available as well. So things like, you know, resources to count. Again, I will say that we need to remain fluid and flexible during this time. So there will be changes, and they may be often, and by all means, we need to make sure that the direction that we're providing the direction that we're intending to go. So we need to make sure that we let families know that whatever they can manage, so we want them to do this, but whatever they can manage in that time is absolutely fine. And understanding too that during this time, mental health and well-being are of the utmost importance. So we need to consider that when we're making these plans for our students. You'll need to be offering suggestions for the resources to be found at home. So, you know, the things that they can use when they're counting. Maybe they're counting cereal, you know, Fruit Loops or something more healthy, cornflakes or whatever it is. But you can make those suggestions as to the resources they could be using. Sorry, I've lost my place. Or offering suggestions such as brain breaks. So making sure that while they're doing their best to be taking part in these activities, that they're offering their children the breaks to be able to recover from the learning that they've been doing, or to change their mindset from one lot of learning to the next lot of learning. Sharing websites that they can use or visit as a part of the learning experience, and using apps or trying apps to consolidate the learning that they're doing. So for example, I know that some of my friends are using Mathletics and Spellodrome, and those particular platforms are quite useful because they help you to collect evidence of what the students have been learning, which will be helpful for when you're trying to work out where you need to start from when you return to school. And providing physical resources, so such as the learning home schedule and visuals. At Down Syndrome Queensland, we have a number of resources that you can download for free. I'll give you those details at the end. But thinking about having a visual schedule to help students understand what we're asking them to do would be a great starting place for setting the expectations. And providing the specific examples for modifications and adaptations. So although the families know their child, we can't expect them to know what would be suitable academically when it comes to modifying and adapting the curriculum. This should simply be the things that you are already doing in the classroom. So the principles of what is happening in the classroom don't change, just the environment with which they're happening change. We need to consider too that in school we've got 28 kids, roughly, children in our class, but at home families have often got one child from that class, and they'll be able to do that work in a shorter amount of time because that time will be more concentrated. So we'd be focusing on perhaps a lot less time but more concentrated, such as 2 hours, and that doesn't have to be a time when you know, they sit down and work from 8 till 10 and that's their day done. They could break that up into smaller chunks so that it works throughout the day, you know, offering those brain breaks and things as well. But when all of this is said and done, so on the other side of everything, we need to consider that there's going to be fallout. So by helping the parents to provide a stress-free or as minimal stress as possible at home during this time, we're helping them to alleviate the concerns about returning to school. So the examples I'll give you is, number one, the transition back to school. This break for some children will be longer than the break over the summer holidays. Therefore, we need to consider the things that we would consider when transitioning from one class to the next. It might not be to a different class, however, they've had a different learning experience. So we need to make sure upon return that we set routines, we create success, or even during this time that we're setting those routines, we're creating the opportunity for success, and we're providing connections so that it all feels meaningful. Working independently too would be number 2 for me. So if we're doing that now, if we're encouraging students to work independently now, then there'll be less concern about that when we return to the classroom. So how independently are you expecting them to be? How are you expecting them to work when they return to the classroom? Because that's how independently we need to be encouraging parents to allow their children to work when they're at home. And the outcome too, so number 3 would be the outcome for each household. That's going to look completely different for every single student. Amongst my friends of teachers and parents, I can tell you that it already looks different from every school that I have heard about. So we need to consider that for every student in our class. That's going to be, look, how are we going to consider that when we return? And finally, that the social aspects of learning at home, such as peer-to-peer tutoring and the like, are missing during this time. So we will need to make sure that we consider those things upon return. So then, connection and communication. I've put that down to who, why, what, when, how, and how often. So let me work through that with you. So who we're communicating with. I understand that we need to communicate with parents, but we also need to communicate with students as well. So that everybody feels involved. It's not just a dump and run of information. And certainly if students don't have a connection with you while they're at home during this time, they're going to be starting to think things like, I prefer learning at home. So having their teacher out of sight would perhaps make them out of mind as well. And it might not be the most helpful way to get them to take part in the activities that you've planned. So we're making sure that we're connecting and communicating with everybody in the family. And why do we do that? So we're helping them to feel more regulated, giving them the security of those things that are familiar. So continuity of school life, continuity of that expectation, and behaving like an anchor in this time. And what would we be communicating and connecting with? So we could be using that for expectation during this time. My expectations of you are this. Answering questions, providing feedback, encouraging students, so helping them to act as a motivator for working. So checking in on the students, offering your approval. I really like the way you've done that activity, and offering praise too, as you would in the classroom. They still need those things. When? So we need to think about when is the most appropriate time to communicate with families. It's not going to be the same time that's convenient for everybody. And certainly imagine if there are 3 children in the family and all the teachers have said they're going to communicate at 9 o'clock in the morning. That simply won't work for everybody. So we need to be explicit about what we're expecting to do. Tell them when to expect communication. So, for example, that might be every second day, every third day, daily, once a week, at the end of a unit. Whatever those things are, make sure that the families and students know when they're expecting communication. And be sure to encourage them to communicate with other people, so family and friends as well, because during this time that's a vital thing for them as well, not feeling isolated. I want to point out too, for you to think about what you're doing for those students who don't connect, those vulnerable ones. Not all the vulnerable ones are going to turn up at school. They're not going to read the emails. They might not respond to any of it. So how are you connecting with those students as well? We need to make sure that we've got things in place to consider those families as well. But I do know that most schools are specifying that contact is made only by a teacher, not necessarily the student's teacher, but a teacher from that year group perhaps. So how are you including your support staff? What are you doing for them? Are they making and distributing resources? Are you using this time to help them with professional development activities perhaps? How then? Are you using phone calls, email, Dojo, or any of those other platforms that schools use? Are you recording videos? Are you using Teams or Zoom? You must keep in mind that it may not be suitable for all of them. So perhaps you will need to provide a list of options for families. And if you're using recorded videos, you could use those for instruction or teaching, or maybe offering a simple story. So one idea that I've heard of is that the teacher reads a story to the students and the students watch the recording. It helps the students to feel connected with their families and perhaps gives that adult at home in charge of the learning a little bit of respite as well, even if it's only a short amount of time. But remember too that there's a sweet spot for engagement when it comes to recorded videos. So the ruling goes that between 4 and 7 minutes is the sweet spot. You'd need to keep that time simple, keep it plain, and put it into chunks. So I have seen a teacher of a friend's daughter who read a story to her class, and her daughter has listened to it over and over again. It wasn't particularly linked to the learning that they were doing, just making that connection, which is so important for students. If you're having live meetings, then you could be using those to share successes. So it might be one-to-one meetings, or it might be a meeting with a group of children from your class. Maybe they could show you the work they've done this week so that they can get that instant praise. Or maybe that could be a time for answering questions or concerns. You could use it for gathering data as well, or you could make it instructional. I like the idea of sharing the successes during that time because it helps with that instant, as I said, instant response. And then considering from home, what are you getting from home, or what are you expecting from home? So you could be asking them to do things like send little videos or send photos, or maybe send the celebrations, you know, so each day are they sending something that they've really enjoyed learning about together? However that may look. They might be sharing journals so that they're helping to feel connected. And you can use those, all of those things, to either further your teaching instantly, or you can use those when you come back to the classroom. I think the idea of using those instantly helps for families to feel connected so that they can see that what they're doing is meaningful. Oh, and consider also that there are permissions required. So if you've, there might be permissions if you're recording something, if you're involving the students. Make sure you've got all of those things set up already before you start. Make sure you've got things like visuals. So sometimes students don't, well, often students don't understand the etiquette behind having a Zoom meeting or whatever it is. So you might need to explain those things to them before they have those activities. Or you might have visuals so that you can hold up the stop, explain that you've muted, you know, so that they know that they can't be heard during this part of the conversation. If they have something they want to say, maybe they need to put their hand up rather than clicking on the hand up choice. And making sure too that the recordings that you do aren't available for the general public, or that they're not able to be recorded unless you have control of those sorts of things. So they would be things to consider. And then moving on to how often. So considering that the information has often been changing daily. We need to be organised and share our intention for anticipated contact. Like I said, for example, that might be once a week, that might be every second day, but make sure you establish that expectation with the families. That helps to provide support both ways as well, so the families know that they don't need to worry about it necessarily because they'll be speaking to you at this time, or they'll be sending you an email at this time, that sort of thing. And in high school, considering, you know, every department, are they all using the same platform or the same format? Is the work timetabled? Can it be pre-recorded so that it's accessible when it suits the student, because it might not be suitable for everyone at the same time? And are the students able to work in blocks? So, for example, some of my teacher friends have spoken about students in their class working on all of their maths on Mondays, all of their English on Tuesdays, those sorts of things. So that's the flexibility that I'm talking about. And now moving on to collaboration. I'm sorry, I've just noticed Vicky says I've lost sound. Can you hear me now, Vicky? I'll carry on. If there are any more issues, oh, and Libby says it as well. Okay. If there are any more issues, we will be recording this and making sure that it's accessible afterwards. So if you've had any issues, please let me know. Send me an email or send an email to Down Syndrome Queensland and we can get that out to you. Moving on then to collaboration. So sharing successful practices. So we all know what works in the classroom, and sharing those successful practices for the home will help families to know that they can set a routine. So for example, to the right of this slide, you can see there's a home learning schedule visuals, and there's a little home learning schedule that has to do down one side, the little squares, 5 squares, and then on the other side, I think they're all done. So you could be cutting out the home learning schedule visuals and placing those on, giving the opportunity for the student to work independently. So for example, when they get up in the morning, they need to get dressed, they need to have their breakfast, then they need to move on to the first activity, which might be reading the instructions, those sorts of things. But those visuals are available at Down Syndrome Queensland, and I will share that with you towards the end. I'm sorry, some people are saying that they seem to have a problem. Just try to reconnect the reconnect button, as this fixed the sound problem, Carly says. Okay. So, schedules which are available for free from Down Syndrome Queensland. We've simply adapted some of our visuals to be more useful at home, and we've got things like choice boards that you can see on the right hand side. Okay, and so the choice boards and first and next, so helping the students to feel like they're taking part in making those choices. For example, I would like you to do these 2 activities and then you can do this activity, or I choose these activities, and you might give them the opportunity to choose from a range of activities that must be done, but they choose the order that they happen in. And keeping things as routine as possible, making sure that students know this is how we're going, trying to keep that routine the same from one day to the next, helping to make sure that when they come back to the classroom, they've got that routine, you know, happening. The opportunity to work independently is helped by these resources, as I've said, but also to have the opportunity to access support if they need it. Well, certainly we're not asking for students to work completely independently without any help. We're asking that parents do their best to allow the student to work independently. But using what is already working in the classroom, but being willing to try new things. So, okay, the schedule doesn't work for these students. Maybe then we change it to, the I choose category or that sort of thing. Being flexible with those, but certainly trying to offer that best, the most ideal model when we're sharing with families. Providing families with the ideas of resources that they could use within the home. So as I said, maybe cereal, maybe they could be counting pencils or something else. There will be lots of sets of things around the home. For example, I've used before socks from the laundry basket. How many pairs can they make when they're counting in twos, those sorts of things. Offering those suggestions to parents, because although it might be obvious to us, it might not be obvious to families at home. So making sure that you're explicit in those sorts of ideas so they don't have to be reinventing the wheel, so to speak. And making it hands-on or physical, sensory, practical, using manipulatives and real-world items. So, for example, they're playing games, but they're learning at the same time. These are all the things you would be doing in the classroom. This is going to be, during this time that we're learning at home, this is going to be a time for consolidating learning. This is not going to be a time to teach new skills. Certainly teaching new skills would be something that as the teacher we're expecting to do. So it's vital that we ensure that parents are simply consolidating things that the students already know. So for example, you might be doing things like number sense, specifically things like qualifying number and building from there. So for example, numbers to 100, or if numbers to 100 is too large, then perhaps numbers to 20. Focusing on those concrete skills, using sight words or learning sight words, and there are a number of ways to do that. Reading comprehension, but providing the questions. So we know as teachers that we need to have open-ended questions when we're providing reading comprehension. Parents don't necessarily know that, so we need to be providing those specific examples, if not a cheat sheet to follow, to follow. Using and exploring a range of texts, whatever is available within the home as much as possible, and reading and literacy skills. So focusing on things such as, for example, you might be learning about George's Marvelous Medicine. So all of the reading and literacy skills will be based on that topic, so that there's a matter of fluidity through their learning, so a theme to their learning, and breaking it into chunks, making sure that we've given them little tiny achievable activities to do. Yes, Anne says clothes pegs are great for counting and sorting into colours. Clothes pegs are one of my favourite. Fine motor skills, all those sorts of things. Lots of great activities there. And then also, as I said before, offering something like a matrix so that they don't necessarily have to complete every activity, but they've got a choice of activities, and those things will help the students to be able to feel like they can achieve, they can choose things that they are going to be successful at. Most importantly, though, when it comes to modification and adaptation, that must come from you as the teacher. You must provide that. Whatever you've already been doing in class. So for example, the student with Down syndrome is on an IEP because they have a diagnosis. Therefore, you will already be working on a set of modifications and adaptations. We're simply offering those in the home. Making sure that all of their learning is meaningful. If they don't understand why they're doing something, then I'm sure you understand they're not going to be interested in learning or trying to do anything to do with it. Offering clear visual supports. So, for example, in your classroom, you have clear visual supports everywhere. Have the families got those same clear visual supports? Are they sharing the idea with the student that this is the same learning you would do at home, just in at school, just in in home? Oh, I messed that up. Sorry. This is the same learning that you would do in school. We're simply doing it at home. And those sorts of visual aids or visual prompts would encourage the students to understand that. We might need to be explicit about that as well. But making sure if we're using visuals that we are that we know that the students understand what each of the visuals mean. So it's all well and good putting up a picture of a cup and a square little thing as a snack, but if they haven't had a square little thing as a snack and a cup in their snack before, they might not know what that is. So making sure that they absolutely understand all of those visuals before we expect them to be working independently on some activities. And looking too at resources that are already out there. So this is where I'm saying don't reinvent the wheel. There are plenty of resources online. Down Syndrome Australia has a list of resources online that you can access. I will send you that. I will share that address with you at the end of this, but actually for each subject, they've got lots of ideas. So you could be doing things like, for example, if your class are learning about animals, then there are zoo virtual tours that you could be doing. They could be exploring their favourite animals and perhaps talking about ones that they like so that then they could share them with everybody. Or maybe going to a museum through a virtual tour. You don't have to do all of it on your own, and you certainly don't have to create it all from scratch. That's not how teachers work. So then how might that look? On the right-hand side, I've got the suggestions for the matrix ideas, and I've pulled these mostly from education websites in Australia. The front one is from Paula Cluth, I believe. I'll give those references towards the end. But we need to be doing things such as visual schedules, as I said, so that the students know the expectations step by step. They've got daily schedules and tasks or choice cards, first and next cards, offering a reward system because this is unusual. They know at home that they can normally be relaxed, whereas now they're expected to do, this big long list of things that they're doing. So we need to help them understand that, yes, once you've done these 3 activities, then you can have this thing, or then you can choose that thing. And you don't have to download them free from Down Syndrome Queensland, although that is available. You can just draw them. I think downloading the ones from Down Syndrome Queensland means that you can use them over and over again and you don't have to draw them every time. But it helps with the students to be prepared as well. So, for example, some of my teacher friends find that the most successful students with learning at home are preparing their following day the night before. So, for example, they know they have maths in the morning part, then they've got a physical activity, and then they've got a writing task towards the end. So they've got all of their maths resources out, they've got their physical space ready, and then they've got their writing space ready as well. And then that variety, as I said, looking at a matrix or some sort of offer of choices, making them feel like they're taking the choices or they're making the choices. And use a timer. I cannot stress that enough. If the students feel like this activity is going to go on forever, already in the classroom we're using timers for many things, that would be an important factor in the family as well. So maybe they're using the timer on the oven or someone's phone or that sort of thing, but making sure that they understand this is a 5-minute task or this is a 10-minute task, however long you've set. Okay, so then looking at things like procedural writing. So perhaps you've got procedural writing going on in your class or in your learning at home, and you're working on what to cover in that time. So let's go back to that George's Marvelous Medicine example. So for example, the family could be reading it. They might have the book at home. You might have provided the book at home. They could be listening to it, or they could be watching the story on YouTube. I know for a fact there are options for watching it on YouTube but you would need to provide those resources. So if you are asking them to watch it, then provide the link. If you're asking them to read it, then know who has that book available to them and know who doesn't, so that you can provide it for those who don't. Maybe too, they could be doing things like listing the ingredients in the story, so getting those things out of their own cupboards perhaps, or writing the list or taking the photos to go with it. Looking at the ordinal structure. Oh, I know I haven't said that right, but you could describe the order for procedural writing. Excuse me, sorry. They could be talking about the order for the procedural writing and encouraging the students to write down even small note points. Maybe someone scribing for them and then they're working towards writing those for themselves. The book could be a bedtime story. So you need this book completed by the time they come back to school. Okay, so that's their bedtime story then, or they're taking turns to read the book together. Maybe things like comparing the procedure of creating George's Marvellous Medicine to a cooking procedure. What happens when we're cooking, and then maybe cooking together so that they can actually see those sorts of examples. So first of all, we need to know what ingredients we have, and then we need to know what order to put the ingredients. What happens when we don't put the ingredients in the right order, that sort of thing. And then they could be thinking about things like, in the morning when they're getting ready, suggesting to the parents that they could be writing their own or speaking their own instructions for making jam toast, maybe initially. Take photos of each of those steps so that they can be ordering it and writing sentences about those, and then moving on to the procedural writing that you want to happen in terms of George's Marvellous Medicine. So create their own marvellous medicine. What marvellous medicine would you create for your grandma? That sort of thing. Another example, so sight words, for example. Using a multimodal approach, making it practical, physical, sensory, and fun. And certainly something that we have at Down Syndrome Queensland that would help with that is our Reading Our Way scheme. So that has activities that you can be doing with the students. Or you could do things like squirting water on the fence to spell the sight words, or squirting the piece of paper off the tag, or whatever it is. You could be getting them to write it in shaving foam, or write the words in chalk and they can hop all over them as they see them on the floor as you call them out. Lots of games, so like hopscotch, maybe they could make rhymes with them or sing songs about them, making it as practical and fun as possible, because I know that most students don't like the idea of sitting down to do all of their activities, particularly because at home that's not normally what we do. Perhaps you're doing story writing as well, so that could be multimodal too. So using things like mind mapping or storyboards, drawing those stories, taking photos of drawings that they've done, using Play-Doh to model each part of the story, or even acting it out. Maybe they could get their family members to help them act out each part, or they could simply act it out themselves, or get their dolls or teddy bears to be acting out certain parts of the story and recording that, so that they can use that information for later when it comes to writing the story in the certain sequence. Have you considered maybe that if the lines are too small, what are they going to do in the home? Perhaps they could do things like, you could draw lines with a chalk pen on the window so that they could write the sentences, so give them the picture from their writing, and then they write a sentence to go with that picture with chalk pens on the window or on the glass sliding door, that sort of thing. Maybe take a photo of it afterwards so that they can create a book or something. Making it into a comic, or video the students acting it out, as we said before, describing the characters. Lots of those things can be very practical ideas. Yeah, use voice to text, Christina says. Mapping apps. That's a great idea. I like that one too. And for games, for maths as well, lots of games can be used for consolidating understanding in maths. So for example, you could have Velcro darts, you could use bowling, you can make that out of recycling that you've got lying around the house. Maybe it's snakes and ladders. Maybe you found a great app that the children can all be sharing. And trying to get the families to understand that if there's a practical way to do the maths, then that would be a good idea too. What we're trying to do with each of our days in the classroom is make sure that the structure is repeated so that they understand the routine of the day, but that the activities are varied. Okay, then we've already come to useful resources. So those resources that I shared with you earlier, the home learning schedule and the home learning visuals with iChoose and First and Next, they are on our website. So I've put the link there on our website, but it's in the education section. And in the education section, it's under education resource downloads, and it's in the visual downloads part there. There's lots of free, useful resources in that part. These home learning schedules are down the bottom, I believe, and the iChoose and First and Next are in different parts, but in the same area, but up the top. So home learning schedules have been specifically designed for that learning in the home. And then we've got another Down syndrome website, so Down Syndrome Australia. And don't be afraid to look at the other Down syndrome sites as well. They've often got very useful information about a particular range of things, and each of the states seem to approach it in a slightly different way, although we are changing that soon. It's useful to have a look to see what they've all got. So in Down Syndrome Australia, they've got the resources for learning at home. And as I said, that's very much under subjects or under topics that you might be covering. Where can you find these resources? So there are resources for families, resources for teachers, and resources for students. Not all of them are games, though. Okay, here's another useful resource I found. So scrolling through the Education Queensland site, I found this oral language ideas grid. And I really love it because it's got some great ideas on it. Let me just, I can't zoom it in for you, but if I read them to you, then that will make more sense. So for example, set up a story time routine, choose 2 books to read. Nice and simple, but it might not have been considered by the families. Google, how is chocolate made and what are the steps? So that oral language, that's really important. I really love that resource. So useful. And then Education New South Wales, and again, the same with the Down syndrome websites. The Education Department websites for other states I found very useful as well. And Education New South Wales, their approach at the moment is to encourage schools to go directly to the school and deal with them. However, they're providing these great grids, so this one's the English grid, but they've got maths grids and all other sorts of things. So for example, sing songs or nursery rhymes, play some music on YouTube, and make up some actions. Lots of fantastic ideas there that I thought were very useful. And then I found Education ACT. They had some great brain break ideas, and I've put the link in there for those brain breaks. You may not be able to see those, but it's simple things that perhaps might not have been considered with the stress of trying to make sure everything else happens. So play a card game, do a family puzzle, do some yoga. My son and I have been doing cosmic yoga and he really enjoys it. He doesn't particularly understand what the yoga is all about, but it's an opportunity for us to do something together and we're not having to think about anything else that he's trying to learn at the same time. And then following on to the other resources that I found useful, I found so many useful resources, particularly the Autism Hub on Education Queensland. So this isn't Autism Australia or Autism Queensland's own site. This is on the Education Queensland site, but they had lots of great resources. Education Queensland have their learning at home resources. Not all families will know about it, so you'll need to be sharing that information with them, and certainly the other states have got theirs as well. I will be sharing these resources. I'm more than happy to share a list of these resources with you. Yes, if you don't receive an email with the list of useful resources attached to it, then please somebody nudge me, but I will do my very best to make sure that I provide those. So just going back to the Education Department resources, I found that they're all called different things. So Queensland, it's called Learning at Home. New South Wales, it's called Learning from Home. Victoria is called Learning from Home, Tasmania Learning at Home, Western Australia Learning at Home. The Northern Territory, interestingly, is called Learning Together, but they've partnered with Education Queensland for their resources, and the ACT have called it Home Learning. But they've all got some great ideas and great resources there. Another great one I found was the ABC Education. They had some brilliant resources, and as I mentioned earlier, I haven't put this one on there. I'm very sorry. I haven't. I've also appreciated Paula Cluth. She has some great ideas for matrices, inclusive education talks, and information about e-learning. I also found some useful information from EdWebNet. So for professional development and that sort of stuff, for information about supporting students, I found those really useful. And I'm absolutely happy to share those resources with you. Okay, so in summary, I can't believe we're here already. In summary, don't be afraid to make changes as we go along. We all know that this is not something we are used to doing. We're not used to having to communicate with families in this way, but it might work to our benefits. So making sure that we're working together and making sure that we're communicating, they are the keys to being successful during this time. And don't be afraid to go back to the Australian curriculum. So looking at the general capabilities and, making sure that your planning and reporting are coming from there, because ultimately that's where the curriculum is embedded, So those students with IEPs, so students with Down syndrome, can certainly have their planning and reporting coming from those areas. Keep it simple and make it motivating. As a rule of thumb, that's going to help everybody. Okay. And again, to remind you, the principles of the classroom haven't changed. What we would ask you to do, or what is expected to happen in an inclusive classroom, is exactly what we're asking or we're hoping to create at home. There are, of course, some areas that we can't create at home, but we're certainly aiming to make the best model so that we've got limited things that we need to work on as a result of being home for so long when the students come back to school. Okay, so let's look at questions. Question time already. Oh, the screenshots is a great idea. Thank you very much. Were there any questions that anybody's got now? Yeah, a Nerf gun. I like the idea of Nerf guns to use with their sight words and those sorts of things. Maybe even number games, pegging them up somewhere and the children trying to shoot them down. Sand timers, definitely using sand timers. There's a sand timer app on a smartphone. Ooh, 5-cent coins for counting in fives. I like the idea of that. Yes, money is always a good motivator, isn't it? Okay, I'm not sure I've got everybody's responses. We wrote postcodes to all our students since we've not been at school. I like the idea of that as well, writing personal letters to each of them. It doesn't have to be long. Yeah, and definitely needing brain breaks, certainly from learning online and working online. Yeah, and I would agree with you that working with students when they're at home and we're not with them is quite difficult, but hopefully we can all get through this by remembering that actually what, as I said, the principles don't change. So what you've got planned for the classroom is simply being, learned in a different environment. That's what we're hoping for anyway. Okay, I'll go back up to the beginning of those questions. Thank you very much. If you have any questions and I haven't shared, I haven't given you answers. Sorry, I'm trying to read and speak at the same time. Yeah, for students who are digging their heels in and refusing, absolutely, because they've suddenly realised that this isn't changing anytime soon. So stop that battle for a moment, step back, let them do something else for a little while, put it into little tiny chunks and maybe help them to learn through doing little things. That's why we make things a game, or that's why we create fun ways or physical ways of doing things, because often students don't necessarily consider that they are learning in that time. They simply think they're playing a game. And story time online, someone says. Yeah, and Go Noodle. Lots of great suggestions there. Okay, I am going to go. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope that was useful to you. Please don't forget that we have my email address is edsupport@downsyndrome.ql. edsupport@downsyndromeqld.org.au. But you can access all of our resources online at the Down Syndrome Queensland website. And this is our next webinar. So we've decided that the transition from home back to school is important enough for us to be able to offer suggestions with. So our next webinar is on the 14th of May at 3:30. And again, that one will be available afterwards as well. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. Oh, sorry, I'll sneak back on. My email address, if I can get back to the beginning of the presentation, I'll show it to you so that you've got it there. edsupport@downsyndromeqld.org.au. Thank you.